I had met Chuck at the Bellagio, the Rockefeller sponsored research center in Italy, and I had greatly admired his work on that occasion. So it was just accidental initially in that sense, just the chance that we were both there. But then it was perfect for me because I am interested in what happens with materials being recycled. What happens when things are moved from one place to another, one culture to another, one mind to another. And Chuck happens to be a genius at that recycling. This is why he's the author of Iphigenia 2.0 and many things of the kind. Cultural mobility is of interest to me because of deep links to things that I've been fascinated by as an academic, not just as an academic, but particularly as a Shakespearean. That is to say, Shakespeare, we know, was perfectly capable of inventing stories. He did it in, as far as we know, in Midsummer Night's Dream, and he did it in The Tempest. But most of the time he likes to rip somebody else off. He loved, clearly, what it was, whether it was a contemporary or an ancient source, what it was to move things into his sphere and see what he can do with them. And I've always been fascinated with that enterprise and with what happens when things do get moved from one culture to another. I'm a Renaissance scholar, and the idea of the Renaissance itself, the very word itself, a rebirth, is another way of saying cultural mobility. Just what happens when things suddenly move from one place to another. It's given me a lot of insights into the playwriting process, starting with the fact that some people are much better at it than other people. Chuck is really remarkably good at it and inventive, and I've learned a lot about what the skills are, what the toolbox is, and not just Chuck's toolbox, a little bit my own, and certainly Shakespeare's, of what it is that you do, what you work with when you try to make one of these objects. Two things surprised me perhaps most immediately. One is that, I'm not sure this is a surprise exactly, but there's this delicious sense in actually playwriting as opposed to studying plays of freedom. That is to say, you're making it up. You can have it come out the way you want. If the story that you've received has a miserably unhappy ending, as indeed the story we borrowed does have a miserably unhappy ending, you can give it a happy ending if you want. You can change its moral valence. So one answer is yes, not exactly a surprise, but the pleasure and the difference that's in the actual agency that you have over the act of making. And the other is exactly the opposite, that there are certain things you can't make happen, even if you want to make them happen. We tried in at various moments in writing the play to make it work in a slightly different direction from it worked, and it's also possible for the materials you work with to resist the direction that you want to take them, so you're free but not completely free. This project changed my teaching in a way before the play was written. It did it as a precondition for writing the play, because what I decided to do when Chuck and I began to talk about doing this was to teach an undergraduate course here, which I did several times, called Shakespearean Playwriting, in which we tried to think about what it was like actually to be a working playwright writing these plays, and have the students begin to think in those terms and write scenes. And we began to play with the game ourselves, and we told the students that we would feel free to rip them off and they could feel free to rip us off, and showed each other what we were up to. So it did make a difference actually that way in the teaching. It's not the only way I would do this, but I've learned a lot from teaching it that way. Actually, in college, I wanted to be I was at Yale, and I wanted to be very active in the theater, but I went to the Yale Dramat, the student organization, to try out for it, and I was actually, I thought, reasonably good, and I did, in fact, make it, but then I was told that the condition of being in it was that I had to give this my absolute first priority, and I actually realized what any student working in the theater understands, which is that it's absolute bottomless pit, and that it's an incredible commitment. And I just, at a certain point, I realized that it was not compatible. That level of passionate commitment, though I hugely admire it, wasn't compatible with what I was up to. I'm very excited about the rehearsal process, and indeed about the whole enterprise in Cambridge, because it's the first time that I will have actually seen this brought to fruition as we wrote it in English. I've seen versions of this play because of a different aspect of the project in Bengali and Calcutta, and in Japanese in Yokohama, and I'll see a version in Spanish and a version in Croatian. But this is actually, for me, a entirely new experience in seeing what happens when it actually gets in. I've heard it read several times, but in a full-scale production. So I'm hugely interested in it. I am interested in the extent to which, because this was an issue in the writing of the play, in the extent to which the actual performance of the play will convey or suggest backstory or hidden story that is not in the script itself. I mean, it's an interesting question, and I have to say, in Charles Mee's work in general, how much is there? How much do you want to convey layers that aren't actually in the script itself? There's a side of Chuck's work that is conspicuously postmodern, and a refusal of the how should we say, late 19th century depth model of theater, whatever one, let's say, would get from Ibsen or Strindberg, which he's actually actively writing in many ways against. But in this particular project, and that's part of the negotiation between the two of us, there's something else at work from which he's, I think, in his career kept some distance, which is a set of suggestions about what psychological processes or emotional processes might not actually be being represented in the play itself, but somehow implied by the relations among the characters and the things they're saying. So I'm curious as to how much of that will actually be on the table, as it were, or in this case, on the stage. My favorite part of the entire process, quite honestly, is just the sheer joy of knowing and working with my collaborator, Chuck, who is just a remarkably interesting, engaging, and joyous human being with a extraordinary set of talents. So it's been a revelation to me, and a huge pleasure for me to actually watch, and not only watch, but join in spirit in the working of that goes into this play with such a person.